Recently, I've stumbled upon an interesting article on Reddit. It's still there and you can read it too, but to sum up, the author talks about how important it is to preserve your villains in the game, as they enrich the scene with drama, and they also add some questionable, but entertaining value to it. Overall, the villains make the game better narrative is quite controversial. On the one hand, we have many examples of how such bad guy type of behavior really crossed the boundaries and made it worse. Last time I was talking about Naniwa, who, despite his great achievements in the game, did a lot of bad stuff outside of it. But on the other hand, people mostly watch any kind of competition or shows for emotions. Occasionally we enjoy when somebody does something unexpected, like rage quits from a one game for instance.
Aiming forward with Zerglings, Mutas, everything is overrunning the scores by MMA. Wait, what? Did Idra just leave another one game?
Controversial people also add a lot of value to the community discussions. In my last video about Naniwa, you can by the way check it out, I was talking about how such people attract a lot of attention and drama, which is actually positive for the game, even though a lot of us wouldn't really tolerate such kind of behavior.
Naniwa seems kind of like a douchebag.
How can a trash talker or a mean person be so useful then? We can take an example of Conor McGregor from UFC. I bet a lot of people would turn on the show just to watch him getting beaten up. And the same goes with pro gamers. We do need someone to root against to spice things up. Such personalities attract extra views that actually help the game grow. And what's more important, they are often the reason why we have pages of discussions on Reddit or Team Liquid. Such topics bring some kind of life to the community, and it didn't feel as stale in StarCraft 2 as it is now, when we have plenty of good guys but almost no one to root against. Today I'm gonna tell you a story about the most successful American player in the early years of StarCraft 2. He did, however, get more fame for his behavior and notorious manners. His name was Gregory Fields, better known as Idra. If you are familiar with StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty or StarCraft 2 community overall, you should have heard at least something about him. Probably it's his rage quits with one games, or any kind of funny compilations.
No idea what he's gonna do, but it's gonna be bad. This guy's really bad. This guy's just bad. Actually, this guy's terrible. He is terrible. And this guy's actually awful. He's just awful.
But it's just the tip of the iceberg. The story of Idra started in 2005 when he was just an up-and-coming player in StarCraft Brood War. If you're a bit familiar with the StarCraft scene, you should know that these were really hard times for any foreign player. The Korean domination was almost absolute and there were only few who could compete on equal ground. And Idra became one of them in 2009, after one of his biggest accomplishments, winning the Istro Superstars tournament. Soon he got invited into Korean team and became part of the CJ Entos, one of the most prestigious teams at that time.
So Idra plays about 12 hours of StarCraft a day. I mean, 9.5 he has to, and then he keeps on playing. So he's a dedicated, extremely good player.
In 2009, Idra was in his prime, winning a lot of minor and major tournaments, and even beating some great players of that time like Whiterra. He would soon become one of the best foreign players and even win the title of the best US player in WCG 2009. However, even though he won most of the foreign tournaments, he didn't quite manage to get to the Korean level. Although his progress was steady, the StarCraft community was awaiting a new title that would be ready in 2010, StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty.
Players have criticized Idra quite a bit because he has remarkable macro, incredible build orders at the start, but a lot of people would say, but you're only engaging in direct fights. You're very good at defending these pushes and potentially crushing them, but a lot of times you'd see players like Huck just wait until they were maxed and then move out, and there was not that much that Idra could do about it.
Idra was most known for his solid macro playstyle. Greg wouldn't risk too much and he's the kind of player who would focus on mechanics and beat the other guys in a late game or simply with superior unit control. Usually, such a playstyle makes you more consistent and increases your win rate. It's really hard to outplay someone who is just faster and is playing safe too.
It's going to be very important that he can get those tanks into siege mode, and here we go!
And there's the stim, he needs to back away, there's a lot of banelings, he needs to run off creep, there's the siege mode, he doesn't really manage to pick off that many, and the Mutalisks just annihilate everything. Idra is one game away from victory. Select trying to micro, Select has just lost all of his tanks. He just did not siege up at the right time. Idra now just marching forward with all of these Mutalisks. The roach change didn't matter at all for him, just mutas and banelings for Idra.
so it was obvious he really needed to transfer his skills to StarCraft 2. He used to play Terran and Brood War, but he was convinced to switch to Zerg, as it would help him broaden his talents. At least, that's what Atosis suggested him to do, which Idra would later regret.
Has Artosis ever given you a high five, and did Artosis denying you the high five influence your choice on leaving Korea?
No, it didn't. That was just a nice little awkward moment in our video. It didn't. It's just a funny little thing, no.
Artosis is a douchebag.
But at that time, it probably was a good decision, because Zerg is still the race that requires more mechanics. You have to inject larva, spread creep, position your overlords, and so on. You do need a lot of APM for that. But StarCraft 2 was a whole new game with many differences from Brood War. If the latter was given a lot of fixes and balance patches, StarCraft 2 had a lot of mess in terms of OP units and combos. And it took a lot of time to sort it out, and gameplay would differ from patch to patch, so it was kinda hard in the beginning. What was also upsetting for Idra is that Zerg became more of a turtling race. In Mix of Liberty, the best composition was Broodlord Infestors in both PvZ and ZVT, and this kind of army was hardly beatable in the late game. That's why most Terran and Protoss players would want to finish the game before Zerg hits his late game timings. And yet in 2010 it was still a new game, and people would try out different strategies and build orders. It also became quite clear that StarCraft 2 was a rather cheesy game, and playing risky and even blindly was sometimes highly rewarded, especially if you were a Protoss player. That was also the time when Idra developed his signature build with 14 spawning pool and 15 hatchery. He would rarely switch his playstyle, and he would always adhere to the build order, making it somewhat easy to predict his future actions. And there were also a lot of nasty build orders like 6 pool, proxy gates, proxy racks that would hard counter such macro openings if not scouted early. Even though after some years most Zergs would eventually adapt to that, Idra was targeted a lot in the early game, as people were pretty much aware of his amazing skills in the late game, so they tried to take him down as soon as possible.
Zerg cannot scout. Marines can prevent Overlord scouting if you are at all careful about it, and it's not a huge investment. You just need 2 or 3 Marines on the perimeter. And wall-ins block any kind of ground scouting. Zerglings, drones can't get in.
It soon became apparent that Idra didn't even enjoy the game due to new balance issues and playstyles. It didn't, however, stop him from being one of the best foreign players at that time. He placed second at IM Cologne and a couple of months later won MLG Washington. Idra was also among the first non-Korean players to participate in GSL Codes, the most prestigious tournament at that time, featuring the best players mostly from Korea, but also from other parts of the world. In the late 2010 he would even get as high as a round of 8 in GSL, losing to another foreign player, Hypro. Throughout 2011 he was a solid macro player with consistent results, holding the title of one of the best foreign players and a late game Zerg. But you probably came not for his results, right?
You're all fuckers.
As Idra was getting more upset about the game, his behavior would deteriorate from month to month. Despite his initial success, Idra was seriously considering retirement as he was furious with Zerg's state in the game. Until 2012 and the infamous era of Broodlord Infestors, Zerg players had a lot of hardships throughout all game stages. For instance, Idra, Nasty and Zenio were the only 3 Zerg players left in the second group stage at GSL January, among other 16 players.
See, this is the problem with StarCraft 2. Like, people like this can just do builds like this and
But Greg Fields was really passionate about the game. He was a true competitor who enjoyed the spirit of all these 1 vs 1 fights, and later he would admit that he played the game mostly due to this feeling.
It's just gotten to the point where competition is not enjoyable for me anymore, and that is what kind of drove me in pro gaming, especially in StarCraft 2. I don't particularly enjoy the game, but I really liked beating people, and now that's just, well, I'm not winning nearly as much, which is part of the reason it's less fun. But the competition itself just is not as interesting to me, or challenging to me, or satisfying to me as it used to be. And without that, I see no reason to continue playing when there's a lot more that I could do in the community. And this kind of coincides well with the departure from EG.
So his retirement has to wait. Idra leaves Korea after 3 years there and participates in many foreign tournaments of that time, mostly MLG and IPL. He consolidated his position as a top-tier Zerg player, but also became famous for his kinda loser mindset and ZVP matchup.
Oh! OGSMC saying, are you angry? Why would I be angry? Oh, a remarkable level of cool. Zerg isn't supposed to beat Protoss. Either way.
Believing it's almost impossible to beat a decent Protoss player under certain circumstances, Idra would leave any unfavorable matches too early. And this habit later would bring a lot of memes, the most notorious Huck's hallucinated void race, when Idra left a pretty even or perhaps one game when he miscalculated Huck's army composition.
Hundreds of Broodlords made this game at the very least, and oh my gosh, Void Rays now out on the field, and it looks like there's some Zerglings doing a counterattack in the main. The Void Rays, all hallucinations, doing absolutely no damage whatsoever. There's the blink up onto the high ground, just trying to distract Idra. Those hallucinated Void Rays almost fully charged, Wheat. And Idra left the game. Oh my goodness, Idra.
It would also repeat from time to time. Another notorious example was a game against MMA. Idra would take an engagement which was fairly okay, and even though he wasn't really doing that bad, Greg felt like it was already lost and just decided to quit. Little did he know about MMA's own mistakes.
Oh, I'm not sure he's taken out the old.
No! Oh my goodness, MMA! Oh! Marcus, that is also not a good use of a third command center.
No, it is not.
But the Mutalisk count is just a little bit too high. Idra now streaming forward with Zerglings, Mutas, everything is overrunning this force by MMA. Wait, what? Did Idra just leave another one game?
Despite such a rough start with Wings of Liberty, Idra still managed to hold himself together and soon showed a lot of promising results, especially winning IM Gonjo, crushing Revival, Puma and many other great pro players of that time. He also implemented a lot of new playstyles, including more aggressive openings and frequent counterattacks. The whole 2011 was pretty solid for Idra, as he would claim many other achievements including Asus Rock Invitational. And then there begins the story of a slump. Even though his Zerg race was becoming more dominant throughout 2012 due to the latest patches and new meta, Idra's performance decreased significantly. He would face many quick eliminations from the tournaments and he would find it really hard to keep his rock-solid macro playstyle. Eventually he returned to Korea to stay in Slayer's house to practice, but it didn't help his results and he wouldn't perform as great in GSL as he used to. His last big victory was during WCS 2012 Global Finals, where he was placed in a so-called group of death with 3 other great players. Idra managed to pull a surprising victory, defeating both Rora and Stefano to advance to the playoffs, where he lost to Rain eventually. So how did Idra drop so much in skill level? Only a couple years before he was considered to be the best US player, as well as one of the strongest foreign players outside of Korea, and now he was just overshadowed by many other aspiring talents.
I've never enjoyed playing the game very much. I feel it pales in comparison to Brood War, and there's just a lot of things that I don't enjoy about it.
Instead of noticing his skills and great mechanics, people were also talking mostly about his bad manners and what swear words or rage quits Idra would do again. And he also gained a lot of haters and people started watching his games only to see him do something weird and controversial.
But I also have this whole core of kind of shitty fans who just like, I don't know, they like to watch and even they'll cheer me on if they win, but if I lose then they just become utter assholes. And so dealing with that got annoying and old over time. I have a pretty thick skin. I've dealt with a lot of that for a long time, but eventually it accumulates. And when you're not getting much enjoyment out of the rest of it, that plus everything else is enough to push over the edge and just...
Idra himself was fed up with this game. Having enjoyed StarCraft Brood War, Idra also hated the current state of StarCraft 2. The game didn't really fit his playstyle much, causing a lot of stress and negative emotions. In 2013 he played his final match against Polt, with a sudden rage quit amidst the battle. It was done because StarCraft 2 at that year was a pretty stall game with a lot of turtling and slow sieges, both not really fitting into Idra's playstyle.
It could just be transfused. Not too many queens out from Idra yet though.
Yeah, Idra lost a couple I believe down the road. How many queens? Actually not a single queen on the map right now?
Oh, and there he goes. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I don't think he was dead yet.
No, I think most people would agree with you on that one, X. I don't think.
But yeah, the biggest thing is that I wasn't actually doing as well as everyone thought. Like I played well. My macro was on point. I had good control against the mines and whatnot. I was playing well throughout the game, and it looked like I was getting a big advantage. But the thing is, people aren't really used to current ZVT, particularly in macro games, I feel. And like every time I would beat his army, but then I would push him back into an established 4th base. And Terran units are much more expendable now that they don't have to build up a big tank backbone to actually deal with their banelings. They can reproduce armies just as quickly, if not more so, than Zerg. So if Terran is getting beat back army-wise, but still securing expansions, they're doing just fine in the game. So I was not actually gaining advantage. I was just kind of holding even. And in a half-map scenario, like a map like Daybreak where it can be split to half-map, you really need to be doing a lot more than just holding back their army. You need to be denying expansions. Otherwise, I feel that you're on the way towards a very uncomfortable situation. And so it did get to late game, and a lot of people looking that would think that I had a pretty big advantage because I had a solid economy and I had ultras out. But the thing is, Polt had a very solid economy as well, and he was transitioning techs to Ravens, and that's not the same situation it was in Wings of Liberty. You can't just sit there and go up to Broodlord, to Corruptor, and Fester, and then win, because Terran air is now better than Zerg air. If they go Battlecruiser, Viking, Raven, they beat you in the air. And he'd been sitting there with a planetary, doing constant counterattacks. I was never going to break that, and I didn't really have a composition that I could head up to that would actually deal with it. So when he established a 12 o'clock base after taking out top left multiple times, and then continuing to put pressure everywhere, like he was playing it well, but it was really just a very uncomfortable situation, and not a particularly advantageous situation for Zerg ZVT. Like, we were on equal bases at that point. I had lost top left, I was denying his bottom right, but he had secured 12. I had 6, but it was probably going to fall. Either my inset expansion or my 6 o'clock expansion was going to fall. My army wasn't fast enough to deal with his mobility, and he was just going to keep building up Ravens and battlecruisers. Like, yes, if he were dumb, he would attack into me and like maybe move command into some fungals, and then my ultras and broodlords could just clean him up and go in an attack move. And I think those are the situations that a lot of people want me to stay in for, because sometimes dumb shit does happen. But as it was, Polt's a very smart player. He was in a really good situation. He wasn't going to throw that away. And as silly as it seems, leaving with a 3k bank, lots of larva, and a maxed army, it's just, if that maxed army isn't going to do anything to him, and he knows how to play the situation, you're going to lose. And I wasn't in a particularly good mindset going in just in general. But I mean, I genuinely feel the game was over and that I had no reason to stay in and try and play it out.
And then there was another round of drama. During a lot of game with an Argentinian player Kaposh, Idra got into his rage mode and told a lot of bad things, specifically, "I wish you get cancer" or something like that. Of course, this conflict got a lot of attention. A huge discussion topic appeared on Team Liquid, and even Idra himself showed up to debate about fans of the game and other things. He also said something really surprising, that Evil Geniuses, his team, was actually paying him money to talk like a bad guy and act like a bad guy who just doesn't give a shit about others.
Obviously, that's not something you say to anyone. That's a pretty terrible thing to say, but I tend to go with that when I get really annoyed. I try and go way, way overboard so that no one will actually believe I actually mean it. Like, I don't want anyone to be sodomized with a tire iron. I don't actually want him to get cancer. It was just like, oh, so this is your justification for acting like an asshole. I'm sure you're a really nice person in real life or whatever. And that just struck me as kind of like smarmy and annoying. And it really bothers me when like random members of the community try and lash out at pros to post on forums just because, you know, that's a pro. I can try and take him down. There's not really anything he can do to me. So that's just kind of annoying. So I made a snarky little comment, like, you guys are all fucks. I get to treat you like it and get paid. There wasn't, I mean, people can take it for what it is, but there wasn't any real intent behind it. It's just a guy was being an asshole. I found it kind of annoying. I made a comment that was obviously way too generalized and way too broad.
This was later brought up to Evil Genius's attention, and Idra was released from the roster due to his disrespectful behavior towards pretty much the whole community. Later on the podcast, Gregory Fields would elaborate on his comments, saying that real fans would not take his comments seriously, at the same time criticizing parts of the community that he felt were just feeding on drama. He also stated that the competition was not interesting, challenging, or satisfying to him as it used to be, and that he didn't enjoy the game as much as he enjoyed competing, acknowledging the stagnancy of his results. He also stated that the game StarCraft 2 pales in comparison to Brood War, and instead he planned to retire and focus on content creation in StarCraft 2 and becoming a full-time caster. He did some of that, receiving positive feedback from the community, but eventually he changed his mind and decided to completely, fully retire in 2014. And yet, he later returned to play some Heroes of the Storm professionally, but that's just another story. It wouldn't last as long as his StarCraft career though. Idra is still one of the most recognizable nicknames in the StarCraft 2 community, and even outside of the game. Despite having much respect from both fans and players alike for his abilities, Idra has gained considerable notoriety for his displays of poor manners. His habit of trash talking, imbalance, whining and rage quitting have made him a colorful and controversial player within the StarCraft 2 scene, and that's probably what most people still miss even nowadays.
This is the kind of player that can get to Masters by playing, Grandmasters by playing the strategy. This game is so fucking stupid.
Many people were relieved with his departure. Good riddance, they said. But actually, the game lost a huge chunk of charisma on that day. Even though Idra of course broke a lot of rules and got way too toxic closer to his retirement, he was still an icon of esports, both because of his great skills and the way he handled public relations. His games attracted more viewers than any others, and he would constantly generate a lot of Reddit or Team Liquid topics to discuss his wins and losses, as well as his comic moments.
Alright, what do you think about Cruncher and how do you think this match is going to go?
I'm playing really bad, but it's more than enough to beat him.
Idra's life is really great now. He's doing some science and enjoying his time, going to the gym and doing a lot of good stuff for himself and his mental health. He still likes to compete, but he really doesn't miss StarCraft 2 as it seems, because the game is still bad in his opinion. But I and many other players from StarCraft 2 and viewers still miss him, as he was one of the most interesting players to follow, a harsh, somewhat rude, but also bloody charismatic guy with decent skills in StarCraft 2. He brought a lot of personality in StarCraft 2, and despite his verbal misbehavior, he still was a nice guy outside of the game. At least that's what most people would say about Idra. This is the end of our story. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing and don't forget to write your opinion in the comments. Have a nice day, good luck and have fun.